He woke up before the alarm, the way he always did when something important waited for him. The room was still dark, and the city outside was quiet, as if it were holding its breath. He lay there for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the soft, steady breathing of his child sleeping in the next room. That sound was the reason he got up every day. Even when his body felt tired and his mind felt heavy. Today was supposed to be different. Today was the interview. He moved carefully out of bed, trying not to make the floor creak. In the small bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back seemed older than his years. Deep lines marked his forehead, and his eyes carried a tired look that never fully went away. Still, there was something else there this morning, Hope. Quiet, careful Hope. He put on the only good shirt he owned, the one he saved for special days. He had ironed it the night before, running the iron over the fabric again and again, as if that could smooth out the hard years behind him. The trousers were a little worn at the edges, but they were clean. Clean was enough. In the kitchen, he made a simple breakfast. Toast, a bit of tea, nothing fancy. When his child walked in, rubbing sleepy eyes, he smiled in a way that came from deep inside. "Big day," he said softly. His child nodded, already knowing. He had talked about this interview for weeks, always careful not to promise too much. Still, Hope had a way of sneaking into their conversations. "Will you get the job?" the child asked. He paused, then crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm going to try my best." That was a promise he could keep. Before leaving, he packed lunch for his child and wrote a short note on a scrap of paper, something he always did when he knew he'd be late. Just a few words of love and encouragement. He tucked it beside the lunchbox and felt a tightness in his chest. Outside, the air was cool and clear. The sky was pale, with thin clouds stretched like lines across it. He checked his watch. Plenty of time, if everything went right. As he walked toward the bus stop, his thoughts raced ahead to the interview room. He imagined the questions, the answers he had practiced in his head. He pictured the office building, tall and solid, a place where people wore clean clothes and spoke with confidence. A place where his life could finally change. The bus arrived late, as usual, but he stayed calm. He had planned for delays. When he finally got off near the business district, he felt his heart start to beat faster. He was close now. Just a few more streets. Then the ground moved. At first, it felt like a heavy truck passing by, a low rumble beneath his feet. He stopped walking and looked around, confused. The rumble grew stronger, turning into a violent shake. The street seemed to twist, and buildings swayed like tall trees in a storm. People screamed. He stumbled as the ground jerked again, grabbing a street pole to keep his balance. Windows shattered. Alarms blared. The sound was overwhelming, a mix of fear and confusion that filled the air. An earthquake. He had never experienced one this strong before. His first thought was of his child. Panic rose in his chest, sharp and fast. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, but there was no signal. Around him, people ran in every direction, some crying, some frozen in place. The shaking slowed, but didn't fully stop. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. He forced himself to move, stepping carefully over broken glass and fallen signs. His heart pounded as he tried to find a clear path forward. His mind torn between reaching safety and checking if anyone nearby needed help. That was when he heard it. A faint cry, almost lost beneath the noise of sirens and cracking concrete. "Help, please." He stopped. The voice came from a narrow space between two damaged buildings. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to his watch. Time mattered. Every minute mattered. The interview was still possible if he hurried. He told himself That rescue teams would come? That it wasn't his responsibility. Then he heard the voice again. Weaker this time, something in him broke open. He turned and ran toward the sound. In the narrow gap, debris covered the ground. Broken bricks, twisted metal, dust everywhere. Near the back, partially hidden by fallen rubble, was a woman. Her leg was trapped under a heavy piece of concrete, and her face was pale with pain and fear. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes wide with relief. "Please," she whispered. "I can't move." He knelt beside her without thinking. "It's okay," he said, though he wasn't sure it was. "I'm here." He tried to lift the concrete, but it was too heavy. His muscles strained, and pain shot through his arms. He stopped, breathing hard, then tried again from a different angle. Nothing. His phone buzzed briefly, one bar of signal. A message notification flashed on the screen. Probably a reminder about the interview. He ignored it and focused on the woman. "Does it hurt to breathe?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "My leg. I can't feel it." That scared him, but he kept his voice steady. He looked around for something to use as leverage, finding a long metal rod among the debris. Using it, he managed to lift the concrete just enough to slide smaller pieces away. Bit by bit, the ground shook again, lighter this time, but enough to make his heart jump. Dust fell from above, and he shielded the woman with his body, instinctively. Minutes passed. He lost track of time. Finally, voices echoed from the street. Emergency responders were moving through the area, calling out to anyone trapped. He shouted back, waving his arms. When they reached them, relief washed over his face so strong it almost made him dizzy. They worked quickly, lifting the concrete properly and securing the woman onto a stretcher. As they carried her away, she reached out and grabbed his hand. Her grip was weak but determined. "Thank you," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You didn't leave." He nodded, unable to speak. Only when everything went quiet again did he check his watch. The interview time had passed. He stood there in the damaged street, dust on his clothes, hands shaking, heart heavy. The hope he had carried all morning seemed to slip through his fingers. He imagined the empty interview room, the seat left vacant, the opportunity gone. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he ruined everything? Then his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his child's school, confirming everyone was safe. He let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked back toward where the woman had been taken, then toward the tall office building in the distance. His path for the day had changed in ways he could never have planned. He straightened his shoulders and began to walk, not knowing what would come next, only knowing that, when it mattered most, he had chosen to stop and help. He stood on the cracked street for a moment, dust settling around him, listening to the distant cries and sirens. The city was in chaos. Buildings leaned at odd angles, and broken glass glimmered in the sunlight that had begun to pierce through the clouds of dust. He could see emergency responders rushing past, their faces tight with urgency, but many people were still stranded, trapped, or simply frozen in shock. His chest ached as he thought about the interview he had just missed. That opportunity had been his ticket out of years of struggle. He could feel the weight of it pressing on him. But then he heard it again, someone crying for help. The voice was faint, desperate, coming from an alley partially blocked by fallen signs and debris. He hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the main street where the emergency crews were moving fast, already helping others. He told himself he could leave this one to them. After all, he had a responsibility to his child. Time was running out. The interview, his future, was waiting. But the sound of fear and pain pulled at him in a way that made it impossible to ignore. He ran toward the alley, careful with each step over the uneven ground. There, Half buried under a pile of bricks and twisted metal was a young man, barely conscious. His leg was pinned under a piece of concrete, and blood stained his clothes. The man's eyes were wide, filled with terror, but also pleading, like he had already given up hope that anyone would come. A single dad dropped to his knees beside him. "It's okay," he said, though his own heart was pounding. "I'm going to help you." The young man tried to speak, but coughed, choking on dust. He reached for the concrete, trying to lift it himself, but it didn't budge. The man's face twisted in pain, and the single dad felt a surge of helplessness. He had no equipment, no professional training, just his hands, his strength, and a determination he didn't fully understand. He looked around. Pieces of metal, broken pipes, and bricks littered the ground. He grabbed a long piece of rebar and tried to wedge it under the concrete. His arms shook with the effort, and sweat ran down his forehead. He thought about the interview again, about the careful preparations he had made, the polished answers he had practiced in his mind, and the possibility of stepping into that office and finally proving himself. And he let it go. Right now, nothing else mattered. The concrete shifted slightly under his efforts. Encouraged, he kept working, pulling debris away, bit by bit. He felt the young man trembling beneath him, fear and pain coursing through his body. "You're going to be okay," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just hold on a little longer." The ground shook again. This time, it was a smaller tremor, but enough to make him stumble. Dust fell from the walls of the alley, and he instinctively shielded the young man with his body. Another second, and more debris might have fallen on them. He swallowed his fear and continued, lifting with all the strength he could summon. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Each time the concrete shifted, he risked getting crushed himself. His muscles burned, his hands were scraped and bleeding, but he refused to stop. Around them, the city moaned with destruction. The sounds of distant shouting and breaking glass, a constant reminder of the danger surrounding them. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he managed to move enough debris for the young man to wiggle free. The man cried out, pain and relief mingled in his voice. The single dad helped him sit up, checking his injuries. The leg was badly bruised and swollen, but it wasn't broken in a way that made him fear for life. That gave him hope. "Can you walk?" he asked. The man shook his head, tears running down his dusty face. "I don't think so," he whispered. He looked around. Emergency responders were closer now, but they were busy with others, moving past with stretchers and supplies. He couldn't wait for them to notice the young man. He had to get him to safety himself. He helped him to his feet, supporting him under the arms. The young man's weight was heavy, but he held him steady, guiding him toward a relatively open street where the chaos wasn't as thick. With each step, he felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. His lungs burned, his legs ached, and every instinct screamed to give up, but he refused. The thought of his child waiting at home, safe, gave him strength he didn't know he had. He couldn't explain why he was risking so much, why he was putting himself in danger, but he knew it was the only thing to do. They reached the open street, and finally, a group of responders noticed them. They rushed over, taking the young man and checking his injuries. The single dad stepped back, wiping sweat and dust from his face, feeling an unexpected rush of relief. The young man looked at him, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, voice shaking. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." The single dad nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "Just stay safe," he said quietly. He wanted to linger, to hear more, to see that the young man was truly okay, but the city demanded attention elsewhere. The streets were still chaotic, buildings unstable, fires smoldering in some places. People were trapped, injured, or lost. He knew there would be more calls for help, more moments where he could make a difference. But he also knew he couldn't stay forever. For a moment, he felt the weight of the day settle on him. The interview, the chance to change his life, was gone. He thought about the office, the waiting room, the questions he would never answer. He imagined the disappointment on the faces of the people who had hoped he would succeed, the frustration of lost opportunity. And yet, he also felt a strange sense of peace. He had chosen to do the right thing, even if it cost him everything else. He walked through the streets, careful with each step, watching the emergency crews work. Around him, people were helping each other in small ways, lifting debris, comforting the scared, sharing water and blankets. The city felt alive in its own chaotic way, a mix of fear and courage, destruction and kindness that hours passed. He finally made his way back toward the neighborhood where his child waited. His body ached, his hands were scratched and bruised, and dust covered his clothes. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows over the broken city. He paused to rest, taking a deep breath. He thought about the young man he had saved, about the moment of fear and courage, and about the choices that define people in times of crisis. He felt a deep, quiet exhaustion, not just from the physical effort, but from the emotional weight of the day. Yet despite the fear, despite the missed opportunity, he felt a small spark of something else. Pride, maybe, or hope. He had acted without hesitation, without concern for himself, for someone he didn't even know. That mattered more than he could measure. Finally, he arrived at the small apartment. His child ran to the door when they saw him, worry etched on their face. "Are you okay?" they asked, eyes wide. He smiled, kneeling to embrace them. "I'm fine," he said. "We're both okay." For a long moment, they held each other, the chaos of the day pushed aside, replaced by the simple, quiet safety of home. He didn't tell them about the missed interview, didn't explain the choice he had made. Not yet. Right now, being together was enough. As night fell, he sat by the window, looking out at the city. Fires burned in some areas, sirens wailed in the distance, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. The world had changed in an instant, but he had survived, and he had done what he knew was right. He didn't know what the next day would bring, or the next chance he would get to change his life. But for now, he could rest, knowing that in the midst of fear and destruction, he had acted with courage. And somehow, that made the world feel a little brighter, even in the darkness. The interview was gone. But in its place, something else had begun a test of character, a moment of humanity that would stay with him forever. And that, he knew, was worth more than any opportunity that could be lost. He woke up the next morning to the sound of birds outside the window, but the quiet felt strange after the chaos of the day before. His body ached from the effort, his muscles sore, his hands scraped and stiff. Dust still clung to his clothes, and when he looked in the mirror, he saw the traces of fear and exhaustion etched on his face. He had thought the day would bring a new beginning, an opportunity to finally take a step forward. But instead, it had brought uncertainty, chaos, and a heavy sense of responsibility. He made breakfast quietly, moving slowly, almost mechanically. His child sat across the small kitchen table, eating toast with sleepy eyes, still processing the events of the earthquake. Neither spoke much. Words seemed inadequate for what they had witnessed, what they had survived. Finally, his child broke the silence. "Did the man? The one you helped. Is he okay?" He paused, stirring his tea slowly. "I think so," he said. He was being taken care of by the responders. "He'll be fine." There was relief in his child's eyes, but also a hint of worry. "You missed your interview," they said softly, almost like it was a gentle accusation. He swallowed, feeling the tight knot of regret in his chest. "I did," he admitted. I couldn't leave him there. The words hung in the air, heavy and unchanging. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with it. The thought of the interview, of the chance to finally secure a stable future, made him feel like he had failed in another way. He had always tried to balance being a parent with trying to make something of his life. And now he felt like he had lost both. He spent the morning calling offices, checking for other job opportunities, and scanning emails. But everything seemed muted, distant. His mind kept returning to the young man he had saved, to the fear in his eyes, the weight of his body under the debris, the helplessness that had pressed down on them both. Saving him had been right, but the price had been high. Around noon, he stepped outside for a walk, hoping to clear his mind. The streets were still chaotic. Small fires burned here and there. Emergency responders moved quickly from one scene to another, and civilians wandered through the debris, looking for missing family members or pets. The earthquake had left its mark on the city, and it felt like the world had shifted in a way he couldn't quite grasp as he walked. He saw people helping each other in quiet, unnoticed ways, lifting heavy debris for a neighbor, sharing water, comforting those who had lost their homes. It reminded him of the moment he had helped the young man, the simple act of choosing to act when it mattered. But it didn't erase the frustration he felt about his own missed opportunity. He sat on a broken bench near a small park, letting his thoughts wander. He thought about his child, about the bills piling up, about the small apartment that felt more like a cage than a home. He thought about how hard he had worked to get this interview, how much hope he had pinned on a single day, and how suddenly everything had shifted. The weight of sacrifice pressed down on him, heavier than the ache in his muscles. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe deeply, focusing on the quiet sounds of life continuing around him, the distant laughter of children who had survived, the murmur of conversations, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. There was beauty here, even in the destruction. There was hope, if he could only see it. Hours later, he returned home, exhausted and empty. He carried groceries in one hand, his child holding the other, and tried to make a small dinner. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and sweat, and the faint hum of the city outside reminded him that life had not stopped for anyone. After dinner, he sat with his child, trying to explain what had happened in words that made sense to a small mind. He didn't go into the chaos, didn't describe the fear in detail. He spoke simply of helping someone, of courage, and of making choices that mattered. His child listened, wide-eyed, nodding slowly, as if understanding the weight of his father's actions without needing every detail. Later, he tried to rest, lying on the couch, but sleep would not come easily. His mind replayed the day in fragments, the shaking ground, the cries for help, the young man trapped under debris, the weight of his own decision. He thought about what might have been, the interview room, the polished questions he had prepared for, the chance to step into a new life. And yet, despite the loss, he felt a quiet sense of pride. He had acted when it mattered, even at the cost of his own opportunity. The evening brought a knock at the door. He opened it to find a neighbor, an older man who had helped during the earthquake. "You did good," the neighbor said simply, nodding toward him. Not everyone would stop like that. The single dad nodded, a faint smile forming. He felt the warmth of recognition, the sense that someone saw what he had done. "I just did what I could," he said. The neighbor smiled back. "Sometimes that's all that matters. You saved a life. Don't let the rest of it weigh you down too much." He closed the door and leaned against it, letting the words sink in. He knew the world didn't work in simple equations of good and bad, success and failure. Life was complicated, messy, and unpredictable. But he had chosen integrity. That choice could not be undone. The night deepened, and he finally lay down to sleep, feeling the ache in his body and the weight in his heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, and perhaps new opportunities. He did not know what form they would take, or if he would have a chance to recover what he had lost. But he understood something important now: the value of a life saved, the quiet power of compassion, and the strength it took to act, even when everything else seemed to hang in the balance. He closed his eyes and thought of the young man, hoping he would recover fully, hoping that someone would continue to help those who needed it. And in that hope, he found a measure of peace. Life had shifted, and the path forward was uncertain, but he had made a choice he could live with. That, he realized, was the beginning of something greater than any single opportunity, any single day. The weight of sacrifice remained, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a reminder of what he was capable of, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, courage and compassion mattered. And in that quiet understanding, he finally drifted into sleep, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. The morning light came gently through the window, soft and quiet, as if the city itself were trying to heal after the chaos of the earthquake. He stretched and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the aches from the day before still in his body. His child was at school, and the apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the building settling. For the first time in days, he felt like he could think, could breathe, could try to make sense of everything that had happened. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the streets. The city was slowly waking, people moving through debris, helping each other in quiet ways, rebuilding in small steps. Emergency crews were still everywhere, but there was a rhythm to their movements, a sense that life was beginning to find its balance again. Then the phone rang. He jumped slightly, not expecting a call at this hour. The screen showed an unknown number, but he answered anyway, curiosity and caution mingling in his chest. "Hello?" He said. "Hi." A soft but firm voice said, "This is the woman you helped yesterday, the one trapped under the debris. I'm okay now, thanks to you." He blinked, unsure of what to say. Her voice was calm, yet carried a weight he could feel even over the phone. I'm glad you're safe," he managed to say. "I didn't think." "You don't have to explain," she interrupted gently. "I just wanted to reach out. You saved my life. I couldn't stop thinking about it last night. I wanted to make sure I thanked you properly." He felt a lump in his throat. He had done what he had done instinctively, without thinking of reward or recognition. And yet, hearing her voice, hearing her gratitude, stirred something he hadn't expected: relief, pride, and an odd sense of anticipation. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. It was nothing, really. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not everyone would. I saw what you did. You didn't hesitate, even when it was dangerous. You stayed when others might have left. That matters. More than you realize." He paused, unsure how to respond. People had always told him he was strong, responsible, a good father, but hearing this from someone whose life he had touched directly felt different. It was not about words, it was about action, and the impact of a single choice. After a moment, she continued, "I wanted to meet you, just to say thank you in person, if that's possible." He hesitated. He had no idea what this meeting might lead to. It could be simple gratitude, or it could be complicated. He had already lost an opportunity he had waited for his whole life. Could this woman change anything for him? Or was this just closure, a polite way of ending something he hadn't even thought would begin? I can meet you," he said finally. "Where would you like to meet?" They agreed on a small cafe nearby, a place quiet enough to talk, but not far from the neighborhood he lived in. After the call, he felt a mix of emotions: curiosity, nervousness, and a cautious hope. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he wanted to go. The streets on his way to the cafe still bore the marks of the earthquake-cracked pavement, fallen street signs, and broken windows. Yet there were signs of recovery, too. Volunteers cleared debris. People helped one another carry supplies. Small shops reopened, selling food and water. It was as if the city itself were reminding him that life continued, no matter how harsh the day had been. When he arrived at the cafe, she was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. She looked up and smiled as he approached, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade. She was calm, poised, but there was a warmth in her eyes that made him feel safe, understood. "Thank you for coming," she said, standing to greet him. He nodded, unsure what to say. "I wanted to see you," he admitted simply. They sat down, and for a while there was silence, filled only by the soft clatter of cups and the low murmur of other patrons. He watched her, noticing the slight bruise on her arm, the careful way she moved, the quiet strength in her presence. She had survived something terrifying, and yet she radiated calm and confidence. "I can't stop thinking about yesterday," she said finally. "I remember the moment I realized you weren't leaving, that you were going to help me no matter what. I've never felt so helpless, and then so safe at the same time." He nodded slowly, remembering the fear in his own chest, the shaking ground, the weight of her body under the debris. It just felt like the right thing to do," he said. "I didn't think about anything else at the time." "That's what made it different," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You acted without hesitation. You put someone else first, even when it wasn't easy. That's rare." He looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his cup. He had always thought courage was something ordinary people didn't have. But now, hearing her words, he realized courage could be quiet, simple, and human. It didn't always roar. Sometimes it was the steady choice to do what was right. They talked for hours, though not about the earthquake, not about the chaos, not about his missed interview. They talked about small things, life, family, the little moments that made people who they were. He found himself opening up in ways he rarely did, sharing pieces of his life he usually kept private. And she listened, genuinely, with interest and care. At one point, she leaned back and said, "I want to do something for you. I don't know how exactly, but I want to make sure you know how much your actions mattered. You changed my life yesterday." He shook his head quickly. "You don't have to," he said. "You're alive, that's enough." She smiled softly. "Maybe for you it's enough, but I can't let it go at that. I've seen what it's like to be selfless, to risk everything for someone else. I know that kind of person doesn't come around often. And I want to help you too, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air, and he felt something unfamiliar: curiosity, hope, a flicker of possibility he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. He didn't know what she meant exactly, but he could sense that this was more than gratitude. Something about the way she spoke suggested action, change. A bridge between the moment of heroism and the rest of his life. He realized that the world, in its quiet and unpredictable way, had a way of balancing things. Yesterday, he had risked everything for a stranger. Today, that stranger might be the one offering something back. It wasn't a promise, and it wasn't easy money or a job offer. It was something more profound, the recognition that human kindness and courage could ripple forward, touching lives in ways that couldn't always be predicted. When he left the cafe, the sun was high, and the streets were buzzing with life. He walked slowly, thinking about their conversation. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope that wasn't tied to a single opportunity, a single interview, or a single day. At home, he found his child waiting, excitement in their eyes. "You look different," they said. "Happy, maybe?" He smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I am." And in that moment, he realized that sometimes life had a way of returning kindness in ways that were unexpected, unplanned, and far more meaningful than he could have imagined. He didn't know the future, and he didn't know what she had planned, but he understood that courage and compassion had a way of coming full circle, often in ways that could change everything. The earthquake had taken broken and shaken his world, but it had also given him a gift in the form of recognition, gratitude, and a connection he would never forget. He didn't know how it would unfold, but he knew one thing clearly: what he had done mattered, and sometimes that alone could begin to shift a life in ways no one could foresee. For the first time since the disaster, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the path forward wasn't lost. And for that, he felt an unsteady, thrilling sense of possibility. A reminder that life's moments, even the hardest ones, could carry seeds of change that grew in the most unexpected ways. He woke early the next morning, a quiet anticipation humming in his chest. The city was still recovering from the earthquake, but life had begun to return to a slower, steadier rhythm. Birds chirped outside the window, and the faint smell of bread baking from a nearby bakery filled the air. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm, though it was mixed with a nervous energy he couldn't quite place. Today, he was going to meet her again after breakfast. He checked the small stack of letters and emails he had accumulated, reminders of the work he needed to do, bills, and messages from potential employers. For the moment, though, none of that mattered. The opportunity he had lost, the interview he had missed, still tugged at him occasionally, but it had started to feel less urgent, almost secondary. To what lay ahead, he arrived at the same cafe where they had met before. She was already there, waiting with a small notebook and a calm smile. When she saw him, she waved, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't expected. "Good to see you," she said as he sat down. "You too," he replied. Feeling his hands brush nervously against the table, there was a pause, a quiet moment where the world outside seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them in the small, sunlit cafe. Then she spoke, her voice calm but deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot about yesterday." "About what you did," she said. "And I realized that I want to make sure your courage and kindness are recognized in a way that matters." He blinked, unsure where this was going. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said softly. "I know," she said. "That's why I want to do this. Not as a favor, not as a reward, but because what you did shows something rare, something that the world doesn't always notice, but should. I want to offer you an opportunity that could change your life." He frowned slightly. "An opportunity?" She nodded. "Yes, I know it sounds strange, but yesterday I realized how much courage, selflessness, and integrity matter. I also know how difficult life can be when you're working hard and trying to take care of someone else. I want to help you in a way that respects who you are and what you've done." He felt a knot in his chest, a mix of disbelief, hope, and a faint fear that it might be too good to be true. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything yet," she replied. "Just hear me out. I'm offering to connect you with people who can help you build the future you've been working toward. I can provide resources, guidance, and connections. But more than that, I can help you find a path that feels right for you and your child, a path where your skills and your heart matter." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in. The missed interview no longer felt like an insurmountable loss. It was a small part of a bigger picture, one that had begun to take shape in the wake of yesterday's chaos. They spent the next few hours talking, not just about opportunities, but about life, values, and the small choices that defined people. She shared stories of her own struggles, moments of fear and uncertainty she had faced, and how she had learned to recognize courage in others. He shared the story of raising his child alone, the challenges of making ends meet, and the quiet hopes he carried for a better future. By the time he left the cafe, the world outside felt different. The streets were busy with people returning to work, opening shops, helping neighbors. The city was still scarred, but there was movement, life, and a sense that things could improve. He walked home slowly, thinking about how a single act helping someone in need had led to a chain of events he could never have predicted. Over the next few days, she helped him connect with people who could support him in practical ways. They arranged meetings with employers, introduced him to mentors, and offered guidance on navigating opportunities he had never considered. Each step brought new hope and new challenges, but he faced them with a renewed sense of confidence. He realized that life wasn't about a single interview or a single chance. It was about persistence, courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered. One afternoon, after a meeting with a potential employer, he walked home feeling lighter than he had in years. His child ran to greet him, excitement in their eyes. "Did you have a good day?" they asked. He knelt down, smiling. "I did," he said. "I really did." They walked into their small apartment, the smell of dinner waiting, and he felt a quiet gratitude for the life they had, even with its struggles. The earthquake, the fear, the chaos, all of it had led to this moment of hope, this chance to build something stronger and more lasting. Weeks passed, and slowly, things began to change. He started a new job, one that respected his skills and gave him the stability he had been working toward for so long. The work was challenging, but it brought a sense of purpose and pride he hadn't felt in years. His child thrived, knowing that their parent was safe, valued, and moving toward a future full of possibility. Throughout it all, he stayed in touch with the woman he had saved. She became a quiet, steady presence in his life, not controlling or intrusive, but supportive and encouraging. She never took credit for his success. She simply helped open doors and showed him that acts of courage and kindness often return in unexpected ways. One evening, as he tucked his child into bed, he reflected on everything that had happened. The earthquake had been terrifying, destructive, and sudden. Yet it had also revealed the strength of human kindness, the power of courage, and the unexpected ways life could change. He had acted without hesitation, without thinking of himself, and in doing so, he had discovered that the world sometimes rewarded those who chose integrity over convenience. He thought about the missed interview and smiled faintly. It no longer felt like a failure. It had been a small step in a larger journey, one that had led him to opportunities and connections he could never have imagined. Life had a way of testing people, he realized, but it also had a way of recognizing those who acted with courage and heart. As he looked out the window at the city settling into night, lights twinkling across the streets, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced fear, made difficult choices, and discovered that kindness and courage could ripple forward in ways he hadn't expected. The world was still imperfect, still full of challenges, but he felt ready to face whatever came next. He went to bed that night with his child safe beside him, feeling a quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. The earthquake had taken much, but it had also given him something invaluable, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, human courage and compassion could create change, hope, and new beginnings. In the days and months that followed, his life continued to grow and improve. He found balance between work and family, learned to accept help when offered, and never forgot the lesson of the earthquake, that one small act of bravery, one decision to help someone in need, could alter the course of many lives. And through it all, he carried the memory of that moment, the fear, the shaking ground, the weight of responsibility, and the knowledge that he had chosen to act with integrity, even when the cost was high. That choice had changed everything, not just for the young man he had saved, but for himself and the child who looked to him for guidance, love, and courage. Life, he realized, had a way of repaying those who acted with a true heart. It might not come immediately, and it might not come in the way expected, but it came. And in that, he found a sense of fulfillment deeper than any job, any title, or any single moment of recognition. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel gratitude, hope, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow would be another day to live with courage, kindness, and heart.